Now we're going to talk about the physical attributes, life cycle, and cast of the worker bee. The worker bees are unmated female bees in a colony. They do basically everything except for lay eggs and mate with a queen. And honeybees are a shining example of harmony and working together to create a life that is not focused on the individual member, but of the overall colony. And they have a very logical progression of their life cycle and the job that they perform for the rest of the colony as they go through their lives. So we notice that the worker bees are the smallest bees. If you compare their abdomen to the abdomen of the queen bee, it's much smaller. There are no eggs. This female has never been mated, and unless you get into a false queen situation, will never lay eggs. If that happens where you're hopelessly queenless, and we'll discuss this during the inspection portion of our training. But if you have a laying worker in your hive, she can lay eggs, but they are not fertile, so they won't ever hatch. The other thing that is pronounced much smaller is the thorax of the worker bee. It's tiny, and her wings, because she does not have to carry the mass of that heavy abdomen that's been raised on royal jelly, her wings are much smaller. Her wings are designed to carry back nectar and pollen when she becomes a forager towards the end of her life. So the worker bee is the smallest member of the colony in size, but in terms of population, they are 85 to 95%, and it's because they do all of the work. A worker bee has a gestation of 21 days from egg to emerging. The queen bee, as she goes through and goes from cell to cell, will lay eggs, and they will go from egg to larva to pupa, at which point the cell is capped over, and I'll show you some neat examples of that when we get to the inspection. And then they'll chew that little hole, or they'll chew the capping open as they emerge. And the first thing that a baby worker bee does when she emerges from her cell is she turns around and she cleans it out. She starts to prepare the cell so that when the queen bee comes through that area of the hive, her cell in particular will be cleaned and ready for one of her many sisters to gestate. Immediately after she cleans her own hive or her own cell, she will become a nurse bee, and she will help her sisters that are emerging. And as they come out of their cells and turn around and get their cell cleaned, the young nurse bees will clean their sisters off, because honeybees are incredibly concerned with hygiene. They're, as I mentioned during the equipment portion of our training, they kind of muck up the entire hive with a product called propolis, and that's because they put medicine everywhere to keep themselves healthy. But anyways, the nurse bees are the baby bees, and they prepare the cells for the queen, and they ensure that the packed pollen or bee bread, which is which is a fermented pollen product that the bees store in the hive, is close to where the larva bee will be, and can be fed the packed pollen while they go through that portion of their life cycle. So that's the role of the nurse bee. As the nurse bee starts to mature through the days of her life, she'll become a house bee, and again will be involved in keeping the hive clean, perhaps drawing wax, and moving the bee bread or fermented packed pollen from cell to cell so that the baby bees can be fed. A couple days later in her life, she will merge from the hive. She will move towards the sun where the entrance of the hive is and become a guard bee. The guard bees are the bees that hang out closer to the entrance. They're still young bees. Usually in the afternoon, we see it around 2 o'clock. They will participate in something called play flights, where they will fly out of just the front of the hive, and the first 1 or 2 feet in front of your hive, you'll see a lot of small fuzzier bees that are flying as if they're kind of kites on the wind, maybe right in front of the entrance, and they're getting used to using their wings. They're strengthening that part of their body, and they are learning where their hive is, so that when they have the job of going out of the hive to either become coroners to dispose of their dead sisters, or foragers, they know how to get back home. So the guard bees, as they are making their way from the cell that they were born further out to the entrance towards the light and the sun, they will become guard bees, and they will protect the hive from anything that wishes to steal their resources, whether it be other insects. You'll get other honeybees that will want to engage in what's called robbing from a weaker hive, or perhaps some of the stinging carnivores like wasps or hornets that will come and eat honeybees and all of their stores. They'll guard from that. Or even raccoons, skunks, bears. The guards are the ones that will alert the rest of the colony that there's some sort of threat. They'll fan pheromone up into the hive to let everybody know, hey, we need you at the entrance to help to protect our home. Once the guard bees have done a good number of play flights and are well oriented to where their entrance is, and they're capable of landing in front of the hive again, then they'll start doing things called orienting flights, where they will get a sense of where their home is in the landscape. So they'll come out, they'll do their play flight, and they'll do some flights where they sort of circle around as if it was an airport, and they become more aware of where they are living. At this time, the guard bees will then become coroners, where their job is to drag any dead bees out of the hive so that the hive can stay hygienic. So in this process of taking dead bees out and dropping them out, again, they stay focused on where their home is and figure out how to get back there. And I'm sure some of you have heard of the dance of the honeybee. This is where this starts to come in, where they learn to give each other's directions by doing this dance. The final job that a worker bee will have in her life is as a forager, and she will end her life going and collecting nectar and pollen for the good of her sisters out, finding flowers and tree buds and things. A worker bee is so determined to continue her DNA in the world that she will actually, when her life is nearly over, forager bees will die typically outside of the hive and will have flown their wings off. There's nothing more heartwarming than seeing an old forager bee whose wings are so tattered because she's been flying thousands and thousands of flights back and forth between flowers to her hive to ensure the continuity of her hive's DNA. So most honeybees do die outside of their hive, whether their little bodies just wear out from overuse or they are picked off by a predator, but that also continues the hygienic state of the hive. So worker bees are absolutely fascinating to watch. They are the only members of the hive whose roles change over time. And they're, when you look in your hive, you'll see more of them than anyone else. They are also the only bees that sting. When a worker bee stings you, the stinger pulls out, which then pulls also the remainder of her intestines. So she is only able to sting once in her life, and then her life is over. So our next section, we will look at drone bees and why they are so important.